13th of November, 2010. Is this going to go down as the day that we have a new beginning? This is the headline that we woke up to in the UK. UK Happiness Index to gauge national mood. Is this a ridiculous thing? Or is this one of the most serious things to happen to policy in our lifetimes? That's the question we have to think about. To me, as someone that's been working in the field of how do we measure quality of life, well-being, happiness, this was a headline I'd been hoping for quite some time. But it still caught me by surprise. Perhaps it shouldn't have done. To give David Cameron, our Prime Minister, his credit, at his TED Talk last year, he said that he was more interested in GWB, general well-being, than GDP, or he wanted to create a measure of GWB. And he's got into power, and he's doing that. And that is some courage to actually do that, and he needs some credit for that. The reason probably why it caught us slightly by surprise was that we knew there was going to be an announcement about national indicators of well-being, not what they were exactly, but it was going to be a week later on the, I think it was the 23rd of November. And David Cameron then organized a workshop, and he said there, we have to recognize officially, that economic growth is a means to an end. That economic growth is not an end in itself, that it is a means to an end. And by that he meant it was a means towards national well-being. This is an extraordinary statement for the head of our government to make. But of course he's not operating in isolation here. He's not the only head of state that's starting to think in this way. President Sarkozy of France in 2008 formed a commission, a special economic commission, on the measurement of economic performance and social progress. He was that serious about it that he employed not one but two Nobel Prize-winning economists to sit on it, Joseph Stiglitz on the left and Amartya Sen on the right. It became known as the Stiglitz Commission. Jean-Paul Fitoussi, as a very prominent French economist, was also responsible for the commission. Even they are not operating in isolation. The OECD has been thinking about the progress of nations for some time. Its chief statistician about 5 years ago was very, very interested in how they measure progress, how they chart progress. They now have a wiki progress page. The European Union has a whole strand of work on beyond GDP. What should we be measuring beyond that? But even there's a history before that. These two men, probably top right, Robert Kennedy, made a very famous speech in 1968 in Kansas University where he said that GNP measured everything in life except that which makes it worthwhile. On the left, you may not know who this is the young king of Bhutan, 1972. He said his nation should think about gross national happiness instead of gross national product. And whilst Bhutan has its issues, if you think of the geopolitical region it sits in, squeezed between Chinese-occupied Tibet and India, it's a difficult geopolitical region. Sikkim is around there, lots of places, Nepal. It's a difficult region, and Bhutan has steered its way through that. But even they are building on the work of partly academics. There's been thousands of academics working on this, but going right back to when a nation was born and the Declaration of Independence in the USA and the Founding Fathers. This is often considered to be one of the most inspiring documents in our history, really. And in the second sentence is probably the most eloquent single sentence on human rights ever written, where it says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, there was a challenge to actually how the United States was living up to that creed by this man, Martin Luther King. When he gave his very famous talk where he said he had a dream, he was not just in denial that people faced great problems. In fact, the sentence before this, he said, even though we face difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. We face difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. I have a dream that this country can rise up and live out the meaning of its creed, that all men are created equal. The civil rights movement was obviously thinking about equality for people of all colors. But I actually think we need to think today, what are our problems of today and tomorrow? And how do we live out the creed of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as well? It seems to be we've been reduced to the pursuit of GDP growth rather than the pursuit of happiness in the way that we organize our societies. And the organization that I work for, the New Economics Foundation, we're a London-based think tank. This is our building. It's an old factory building. We like to think we're an ideas factory these days rather than making things. And NEF, as we like to call ourselves, was founded really to consider how we tackle two problems. The problem of persistent global poverty and inequalities, social justice issues, and the problem of sustainable development, biodiversity loss, climate change. We would say those are our problems of today and tomorrow. Climate change looms over our tomorrows. Global poverty hangs around persistently around our todays. But we have a third principle, and that is people's well-being. And we don't have that principle there to be light and frivolous and fun, though we do have fun sometimes at work. We have it because we actually think it opens up a space to reimagine what the other two issues are about. I actually think that we have persistent inequalities and we have overconsumption of the Earth's resources precisely because we have not thought hard enough about what human well-being is, about how our lives are going. We've assumed that if we grow our economies, everybody is going to get happier. That is the logic of our society. And that's a false logic in many ways, and that false logic needs to be exposed. It also starts to unpinch solutions to how we deal with them. So this is the issue between sustainability and GDP has been felt like almost an intractable problem. And this is a graph of 140 nations around the world. Running horizontally on the graph is their ecological footprint. How much impact do they have on the planet? When you get over a score of about 2.1, you're into unsustainability territory. So there's a lot of countries to the right of 2.1 that are unsustainable. Going upwards is GDP per capita. And you can see that looks pretty much like a straight line to me, that more GDP, more pressure on the planet. Doesn't look like there's much possibility space there. If we think that GDP is a measure of national well-being, how are we ever going to deal with our sustainability issues? It feels like the only place we've got to go is down. It feels like we're going to have to give up things. It feels like we're going to have to shrink our economies. And if we think that shrinking our economies is shrinking our quality of life, we're in real problems. No politician can go to the poll and say, I'm going to reduce your quality of life. So how do we do that? Well, this graph, instead of plotting GDP against it, is going to plot an indicator of national well-being. And you suddenly see the nations of the world spread out on the graph. The measure is called happy life years. It's the highest level of national well-being we can do. When we're comparing a lot of countries, we have to use very simple data. But it's saying that how long is a life in a nation, what's life expectancy, and how happy people are. It's saying that a good life is a happy, full life. And it's using indicators of that. And you see the nations of the world spread out on that. So if we go back to this one, space to reimagine, space to think again about what these problems are. Suddenly, we can think about how do we move countries in these directions. Rich, over-consuming countries with relatively good levels of well-being need to think about reducing their ecological footprint while still improving well-being. Poor countries, like sub-Saharan African countries, need to really work, and we need to support them to work to increase human well-being. Average life expectancy is around 40 years in some of these countries. And medium development countries, such as Hungary, such as some Asian countries, need to think about how they can do both those things at once. But suddenly there's a possibility space that we can think to move in. Now, as I said, happy life years is a very high-level indicator. And we need to think quite carefully about what well-being is. Sometimes we think of simple indicators like that as an outcome that we can get to in very linear ways. Well-being is a very dynamic space. And I want to share with you a model that we've created of well-being, which was for the Government Office of Science in the UK, which shows how dynamic this whole system is. This is the model, and I'll talk you through it very briefly. But at the bottom and the foundation of the model, on the left-hand side, it says external conditions. This is our environment, sometimes thought of as the space that we live in. On the right-hand bottom is personal resources. That's us. I am myself and my circumstances. Those two things are going on all the time. And they come together in the middle, which says good functioning. What we do in life. And it's important that we understand these two things are coming together. Why is it that some people thrive in very difficult circumstances and other people sink in very benign circumstances? It's because these two things are going on. Obviously, more people thrive in good circumstances and more people sink in difficult circumstances. But we get things going off there. And it's because they're coming together. And then out of that comes what people feel about their life. What they do shapes how we feel. It looks like the energy is just flowing up in this diagram, but actually there's feedback loops absolutely everywhere. Energy flowing around the system. On the right-hand side, every psychological theory and understanding of emotions will talk about emotions as feedback loops to improve our functioning. If we experience fear, it's because something is out there in the environment that we need to respond to. Move, perhaps. Anger is a violation of a norm or something like that we need to stand up to. And sadness can be about a loss of a support. But what about positive things? Happiness, engagement, enthusiasm. What are they feedback loops around? Well, when we're feeling good, we look out and we see everything in the horizon. We can see opportunities. They're not about threats, they're about opportunities, taking opportunities. You do not find many successful entrepreneurs who are pessimists. They're optimists. They're scanning for opportunities all the time. And we know that the functionality of people is well improved by their well-being, even to the point where people who've got high levels of positive emotions and happiness tend to actually live longer, up to 7-10 years longer than other people. We function quite differently. We also have a feedback loop right back to our personal resources. We know if we're at work and we get one comment in the day which is particularly barbed and goes through our defensives, we shrink slightly. We feel slightly less. The next day we might go with less confidence. And similarly, if we've done something well and we feel good, we expand. And we actually feel more competent and able to engage with the world. So there's feedback loops going there. And then there's obviously one around what we do shapes our environments. What we do shapes other people's environments. If you've got someone who's a great person in your community, they make it better for everybody. And that is going there. And there's energy all around that system. And that's critical to understand because it means that there are different intervention points. If we think about what governments do, then actually they're going to intervene mainly in the bottom left box around the conditions of life. It would be ridiculous if we thought governments were going to try and make you happy directly. They're about creating the opportunities for well-being to emerge from. That's what their role should be. So if we think about what governments do, then how would it look like if they actually sought to promote well-being and create the opportunities for it? There's three main spheres. This is very simplistic, but there's three main spheres that governments impact. One is the economy. Two is they deliver public services. And three, they're very involved in creating local spaces. So here are some ideas about what a manifesto for happiness might look like if we thought about these three spheres. So in the economy, we should be thinking about creating good work in the economy. We know unemployment, we know from all sorts of psychomorbidity studies, psychiatric studies, that unemployment is terrible for people's mental health. It also has a scarring that actually once you've been made unemployed once, there's actually an effect that can last for a long time after that. So if governments are thinking about the balance between unemployment and inflation, maybe they should pay a lot more attention to unemployment. I don't think anyone's been scarred by inflation. It's annoying, but not scarring. We need to also think about how we create good work in organizations. Well-being at work is really great for everything, staff engagement, profitability, all sorts of things. Good work, really, really important. Second one, a little more radical, reform the banking system. The banking system has had a lot of creativity and innovation in it, but it hasn't really been improving the human lot. It's a unique industry. We should not treat it like any other industry. It is where credit is made in our societies. It's too important to be left to private profit. We must build in social and environmental value into our banking system. Otherwise, we will never solve our problems. And the financial crisis has only shown that. Delivering public services. The two big ones are education and health care systems. They would change very differently if we thought about well-being as their outcome. What would schooling look like if we were thinking about the well-being of young adults as they came out of it? We wouldn't be stuffing them with so much knowledge and testing them so much. We'd be thinking about their multiple intelligences and their curiosity. Health care systems would change also. Mental health. There's no health without mental health. How do we promote that? How do we prevent ill health? At the moment, we've got a sickness service. We need health systems. Local areas, engaging with citizens. Governments have lost the ability to actually engage well with citizens. How would we create government policy that actually broke down those barriers? Should we have coaches in every deprived community helping people rediscover their passions and set up enterprises? We need to have a bubbling up economy instead of a trickling down one. We need to create that innovation at the bottom. Building good foundations. Why on earth is it that architecture is somehow very sexy and public planning is very dull? Public planning, you're designing whole cities, towns, the spaces that people move in. That should be one of the most important jobs in government. Why are our high streets reduced to just commercial spaces? Why shouldn't they be spaces for joy, creativity, connections instead? And finally, governments need to measure what matters. We need to create national accounts of well-being. We need to look at the environmental impacts systematically and have those fed back into our policy. So that's things that governments can do, but we can do things too. We can intervene and shape the things that we do. Energy will flow around the system this way too. And these are 5 things that you can do to improve your well-being, whatever your circumstances are. The first one is connect. Your social relationships are the most important thing for your well-being. The second one is being active. Physically moving. Passivity is bad for well-being. If you're in a bad mood, get outside, go for a walk, or run, whatever it is. Take notice. Look at this beautiful theatre. But take notice of beautiful things around you. Notice what's going on with other people. Notice what's bubbling up from within you. All of these are strongly evidence-based. These again with the Government Office of Science. The fourth one is keep learning. Learn throughout the whole life course. Learning is great for our well-being. Not formal learning, it can be learning to cook a new dish, whatever. And finally, give. Give is great for our well-being, not only other people's. Evolution is fantastic like that. We feel good if we give. So those are 5 things that you can do. So both nations and people can nurture well-being. It's an interesting new way of thinking about a relationship between both of us. So next time you see a headline like this, be excited. Happiness is a serious matter. And if we're very lucky and we know it's more than a new beginning, but actually a new dawn, if we start to see headlines like this in our newspapers. Thank you very much.